Hello and welcome to the 50th anniversary of Eye of Argon here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z. Martin. We've got a great panel for you tonight. We're going to talk about this kind of amazing event that happens at conventions, how it came about, where it came from, why it's there, and what we're going to do in the next 50 years with it. So, folks, let's get introductions, and then we'll turn it over to our fearless leader, Michael Ventrella, and I'm going to go around the circle that I can see and start with Hildy.
Hi.
Introduce yourself.
Sorry. Hi. My name's Hildy Silverman. I am a short fiction author. My latest story is out in Badass Moms from Crazy 8 Press. And I've been performing or reading or both Eye of Argon for about a decade plus now.
Very good. Ian?
Hi, I'm Ian Randal Strock. I'm the publisher, owner, editor-in-chief, guy who opens the mail at Gray Rabbit Publications and Fantastic Books. Come find us on the web at fantasticbooks.biz. And I've been an editor in the speculative fiction field for a really long time. I'm also a writer. I think of myself as a science fiction writer, even though most of my published words have been nonfiction. I've been in several recent anthologies. I've had several in Nature. And my mainstay is Analog, from which I don't yet have a contract, but I just got an email from the editor saying I sold him my latest story. So I'm really excited about that one.
Yay!
Yay.
Keith, how about you?
Well, how about me? I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido. I have written a ridiculous amount of fiction or an amount of ridiculous fiction, depending on which Amazon reviews you read. Like Hildy, I am also in Badass Moms. I've also got a story in Pangea 3 Redemption, which is also from Crazy 8 Press. I've got 2 collaborative novels coming out this year called To Hell and Regroup with David Sherman and Animal with Dr. Munish K. Batra. And I'm also working on the next books in my 2 fantasy series, Phoenix Precinct and Feet of Clay, the next Brom Gold book. And a bunch of other stuff. I've written a lot of media tie-in works. I got a Grandmaster Award for that, which is mostly due to just hanging around long enough. And I've also been an editor in the field about as long as Ian has, actually. We both got started in the early 90s. And I've been doing Eye of Argon readings for as long as I've been doing conventions, which is also going back about 25, 30 years. So.
I'm Gail Z. Martin. I write epic fantasy, urban fantasy, steampunk, and more. And as Morgan Bryce, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. I've probably been doing Eye of Argon for more than a decade as well at conventions. And it's always been a lot of fun. And now over to Michael.
Hi, I'm Michael A. Ventrella. I have 4 novels out so far and a bunch of short stories in various anthologies, but mostly my best-selling stories are anthologies that I've edited, which include a lot of these people who are on this panel here. I've edited, and Ian has published some of them. So that's my main name, but I've also been doing Eye of Argon for many years as well.
Yeah.
So let's get started, shall we? First, let's talk about the Eye of Argon and what it is. I assume if you're watching this panel, you already know basically what it is, but let's talk a little bit about the history of it. Ian, you want to give us a little background?
Sure, I'd be happy to start. 1970, a guy named Jim Thies was a science fiction fan, science fiction fantasy, and like many fans at that time, thought he wanted to write the stuff as well. And having grown up reading all of this stuff, 16-year-old Jim Thies set about and wrote an epic fantasy story called The Eye of Argon and sent it off to, well, not a professional science fiction magazine, but rather to OSFAN, which was the Journal of the Ozark Science Fiction Society. And it was accepted and it was published in 1970 with illustrations by a man named J.T. Rykosh, about whom I know absolutely nothing. The story was, it was a high fantasy story. It was a quest, it was an adventure, and like most things of that ilk, it probably should have just disappeared. But then something happened. Late in the 1970s, perhaps the early 80s, it started being read at conventions. And a great mythology grew up around the story, that it was a lost manuscript, that it was the worst thing ever written, that somebody had discovered it, that there was an entire mythos about how one must read this manuscript. And it wasn't until actually just the previous decade that somebody thought to seek out Jim Thies, the author of this thing, and tell him that, hey, everybody's reading your stuff. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2002 at a very early age, but he did know that his story lived beyond the fanzine in which it was published. He gave-headed it early. He was out of science fiction altogether at the time. And the story lives on, and though it's probably not the best piece of fantasy fiction ever written or that you've ever heard, Jim did what most of us writers hope to do. He has survived beyond the grave. We know his name, we know his work. He wasn't paid any money for it, but he is remembered. So I look at it and I think that's a really wonderful thing.
It's interesting. We should talk a little bit about what it was like in 1970. It's not like you could go on the internet and post your fiction. It's not like you could edit it easily in a computer. You know, pretty much all there were these little fanzines. And that's what this was, right? What, like a little fanzine thing?
Yep. Mimeographed. Actually, I think it was mimeographed. The older people amongst you will remember those things from school that came in purple ink and you would sniff them because they were fresh.
Yep.
I ran a fanzine in 79 to 81, and I understand that completely. Mine was Xerox instead of mimeographed, but yeah, there were very few ways to share fiction that wasn't traditionally published, any kind of fan fiction. And it really often was either through these little fanzines that might have a print run of 100 copies, because that's all the library would let you use their photocopier for, or your dad at work, you know, who managed to get it done after hours. And so they were really limited run. And it would be, you know, you'd go to a convention and you'd happen upon one, or a friend of a friend would hook you up with somebody who was publishing one. Or you'd go to a room party at a convention and people would bring their handwritten and typed stories and take one, pass it down, take one, pass it down. That's how you read fan fiction, because there was no other way to get it. And this was long before AO3. So yeah, I totally get the mimeograph vibe from this.
Mm-hmm. I did the same thing in the 80s. I started a magazine called Animato, which was about animation magazines. And we had no idea. I had no connections. I didn't know what I was doing. And we just sort of put it out there. And that's what people did in those days. Oh, what it was like back in those days.
You know, we did it for love. We didn't do it for money. We didn't do it for fame. We did it for love. And we hoped to find maybe a few dozen other people who actually loved it too. And so I'm assuming that's part of what Jim was doing when he put this story out there, was he just wanted to find someone else who liked the same kind of things.
Look, before we talk about how it got read at conventions, let's talk about what the story is in terms of why is it considered so bad?
Well, I think we should mention that Jim was 14 when he wrote this. He was a young teen. 16. He was very young.
He was a teenager in any case.
He was 16 when he wrote and submitted it. And it
Right.
was published in 1970, yeah.
Right, which explains, I mean, it seems to be sort of in the vein of a Conan fanfic, you know, the old pulps, the sword and sorcery pulps that would have been still very popular back then. So it's that kind of story.
It's just not very well written, you know.
Well,
but at the same time, we'll talk a little bit later, you know, not all of us wrote well when we were 16 years old either. I mean,
oh, good Lord.
I think we might have written better than that, but we weren't, you know, I don't want anyone to read the stuff I wrote when I was 16 either.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, it's got typos, and it's got some over-the-top purple prose, some language that isn't really considered cool to use anymore. Not that
and a remarkable obsession with anatomical details.
Yes.
Those
Remember the hyoid bone.
Yes.
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 Keith, you want to talk to us about how it got to be read in conventions? Do you know the story about that?
It started becoming a contest with people who would not, because the idea would be to try to read this story. Now, in case it hasn't been made clear, this thing is full of typos. Some of them are just, you know, obvious typos that crop up. Some of them may have been things that just came up when typing it. But it was published with a lot of combined words, misspelled words, bad capitalization, using the wrong word in particular case, in some cases, some homonyms that were used wrongly. And it became a contest to see who could read it as far as possible while doing two things. One, keeping a straight face, which is not easy while reading this, especially if you've never read it before. And the second thing is to read it exactly as written, which is also a challenge because when you're reading something, you're mentally correcting things as you go along. So you have to read the exact text as it's given. And people would win fabulous prizes if they could make it past, you know, a certain number of paragraphs or pages.
Well, we should mention this was usually done at midnight when people were already had some drinks at the bar too, so that helped.
Yes, yes, and I found I've done my best readings of Eye of Argon when I have a drink with me while I'm doing it. But it became a tradition to, you know, like there would be a panel of people and they would each take a shot at it. And if they made it that far, they would also bring people in from the audience, volunteers from the audience to take a shot at it as well. And oftentimes, like I said, there really would be prizes or at least some sort of notoriety or something. You won the Eye of Argon because you made it, you know, 4 pages.
For anyone watching this, by the way, we are going to do some readings from it at the end, and we're also going to show you some of the text so you can see all the mistakes. So hold on to that. We will get to that. Does anyone also want to add anything about that, about the readings? Any funny stories you had at a reading? And we're not going to talk about the acting it out yet.
Right. Actually, my favorite thing, oh no, that relates to the acting out. There was one time at PhilCon where a couple of us were doing really well at it. And so the moderator, which was, I believe it was Oz Fontecchio who was moderating it, and he challenged us to do them in different voices.
Yes.
So I have read The Eye of Argon as Kermit the Frog. I have read it in the voice of Todd Rage, who is a character from the HG World audio drama that Jay Smith wrote that I was part of. Todd Rage talks like this. And so I read The Eye of Argon in that voice. And Leonard Provenza did it as Humphrey Bogart one time. Alex J. Berman did it in I can't remember what voice he did now, damn. But he did it in some famous person's voice. I forget who.
You did Dudley Do-Right once, I think, too.
Oh yes, I'll save you, little Nell. But I'd forgotten Dudley.
Greg Frost did it as I can't remember who Greg Frost did, but it was fabulous.
Sean Connery.
That's right.
Greg Frost did it as Sean Connery. Yes. Greg does a frighteningly good Sean Connery impersonation.
So what happened was one PhilCon, this was probably, I don't know, a dozen years more, I was on that panel.
Right.
And I was reading and I blew it. I just, you know, started laughing early on. And they said, okay, you're disqualified. And someone from the audience said, make him act it out. So I went, okay, being the ham I am. So I stood up and I started acting out Grigner, doing all the crazy things. And it got a great laugh from the audience, and we did it. And afterwards, I was never invited back to PhilCon to do this again because apparently they didn't like that. But I liked it, so I started bringing it to other conventions and getting my group together, which includes pretty much everyone on this panel and a few other people who have helped us over the years, obviously, Daniel Kimmel and Walter Hunt and Peter Prowitz. Anyway, we got a crowd of people that normally help us out. And Gene, and who else? KT Pinto did it a couple times. Anyway, we had a crowd that did it. Peter David joined us one time, and he ended up just cracking us up with his comments. And someone recorded that, so if you go online and look up Peter David reading The Eye of Argon, you can see it. You can see us doing it, and Peter David is there.
Well, and what I remember from that time Peter David did it with us is somehow he ended up wrapped in a tablecloth like a toga. And at the beginning, he wasn't entirely sure what he'd gotten into. And then you could see that moment when he said to himself, hell, I'm just going to roll with it. At which point he started having fun. And that was just so cool to have the guest of honor wrapped in a tablecloth like a toga and really get into it.
And that's part of the fun. To me, part of the fun of doing it was when we were first starting it, we didn't have the story memorized like we do now. We've been doing it for 10 years. We know the story backwards and forwards. We can read it without making mistakes. But the first few years, we didn't have it memorized. And so it was just as much of a surprise for us acting it out as it was for the person reading it. And we had as much fun as the audience did, I think.
You also, with the Peter David story, you point out a key important part of this entire concept, the reading of the Eye of Argon, which is that science fiction conventions, when they started, they were for the fans. That was it. The few people who looked at it as a professional point of view, well, they were rare and there were a few of them. Science fiction conventions in general have become much more professional organizations, which is good for me. I make my living at them too. But doing the Eye of Argon and letting yourself really go and get into it brings us back to the original concept that we're here for the fun of it. We're here because we're the fans, and this is just something we're doing together as fans. Nobody's making any money on it.
We weren't necessarily.
I'm thinking there is a way to monetize it, but nobody has, and that's not the point.
You know, we'd go to these things, and quite often we wouldn't even introduce ourselves, just then, hi, I'm Mike, and we do it. We wouldn't be using it to promote ourselves. We were just there to have fun.
And there have been times when we've done it where we've brought down audience participants and they've gotten to read until they mess up or until they laugh or whatever the threshold is. And, you know, late night, everybody's had a couple of drinks, everybody's kind of cool to go with it. It's really been a lot of fun.
And the audience will act it out too, and they sometimes they add a lot of entertainment value to it, depending.
Especially because we know what each other is going to do at this point, so it's always nice to have the audience come in and someone and do something completely new that surprises us. But there's been some really fun scenes. I still remember that time that Keith decided to pick Hildy up in the middle of the thing.
Yeah.
I've got pictures of that, by the way.
Blackmail.
Well, like I said, we all expected, like you said, we expect what's coming, so I wanted to do something we hadn't done before, so I picked Hildy up.
Yeah.
And my problem with the whole thing is that when I joined the troupe, you made me the editor. So yes. I'm the guy who reads along with the reader to judge, as a rabbi does at a bar mitzvah, to make sure that you get all the words right. And I'm the one who calls them out when they get it wrong. The problem with doing this is I never get to watch the acting because I'm always watching the script.
Right. Well, someone's got to be the judge. Yeah, but
my favorite thing that happened during the acting it out was one of the times we did it at Orisia. And there's a bit in the story where Grigner is in a dungeon and he grabs a rat because it's a dungeon, they're rats. Somebody in the audience had a stuffed rat and threw it at me, so I had a prop.
That was great.
Which was great on several levels. One, I had a prop, I had my own little rat, and that was when I discovered that there was a description in the story that didn't work. For whatever reason, I mentioned that Jim Theis had a thing for anatomical detail. There were lots of very detailed graphic descriptions of certain acts he took, including when he breaks the rat's neck. And it was told in such detail that I did not realize until I had the rat in my hands that the way he described it wouldn't work. You need to twist that way in order to break it. But the way he described it was twisting the other way so your arms hit each other. So you can't actually break the rat's neck that way.
Yeah.
It's like we got to discover a whole new thing that was ridiculous about this story that we didn't even realize because somebody threw a stuffed rat at me during the thing.
I still remember.
I will say Mike's my favorite rat. You do a wonderful rat, Mike.
Yes.
It's enjoyable.
Although he's also a good king. He does the
excellent king.
Well, thank you.
Belly full of jelly king. Yeah.
Well, I'm also very good at the Eye of Argon because I've got the bulbous nose that it's mentioning, so I can just
right. Yes, that's important.
Whenever they get to that line, I just do this. Oh, great. Yeah.
Well, and I think Peter David got to be the king, and when it got to the whole description about his ample body and all that, boy, did he play that up. You know, it's one of those moments where it could go either way, and somebody could get really offended, or somebody could be, you know, really not cool with it. He just rolled with it and was a really good sport about it and played it up, and that's cool.
I got to do an Eye of Argon reading at Ozfest in Omaha, Nebraska. This was in like 2013, 2014. And And one of the organizers wanted to do an Eye of Argon reading and had me on it. She and I were the only people at this convention who'd heard it before. There were a few people who had heard of it, but had never actually read it. And it was so much fun to have an audience full of people who had never experienced this before, and just watching their jaws drop and their eyes widen with each passing scene. And, you know, chapter 3A. And
it's like when you go to see Star Wars for the first time. You can never capture the feeling you had when you first saw it. And the same thing with the Eye of Argon. It's like,
exactly.
I'll never have that feeling again when we first got into it. Yeah. I want to remind, there was one time we had Marty Gear helping us. And having Marty play one of the horses at the end, he was on his hands and knees with, I don't remember, it was Hildy, someone was riding him. Oh, it's good when you have people who take it the right way and just have fun with it and are willing to make fools of themselves. That's when it really works well.
Yeah, I think this is not something that anybody goes into with any degree of pride. You've really got to be willing to just have fun with it. And like you said, just make a fool of yourself. That's the whole point, is to be ridiculous with it.
And we were really going to do that this year. The idea was at the 50th anniversary at Balticon, it would have been 50 years since it was published, we were going to do the Eye of Argon play. And basically we were going to get up there with the worst props imaginable and act it out and just read the whole thing, not let anyone in the audience. And someone was going to read it and we were just going to act it out. And we will do that when the virus is over. We will do it. I'm not sure where and when yet, but that will come about. So we'll have a lot of fun with really, we thought at one point about borrowing props from my LARP game, you know, and they said, no, those are too good. We need crappy props, things that look terrible.
We'll be wearing sheets and, you know,
sheets
wonderful costumes like that.
Yeah, we were going to
say for the swords, you know.
Yes.
We were going to get like, you know, the bar wench who's half naked, we're just going to put a sheet with a drawing, you know, of boobs on it, you know, and that'll be the costume for that part. So you got to have fun with it, which brings us to the next question. Well, actually, before I go to the next question, does anyone have any other great stories they want to tell?
I just remember the one time we actually did it end to end is a fond memory in my heart, because it was the last time I think we did it at Aresia, and with Genevieve. Remember, she joined us, and it was the first time, because the ending for many years to Eye of Argon had been lost. There was no end. And then I believe it was Lee Weinstein when he found the book. He found the ending. So now we have it. So for the first time, they gave us like 7,000 hours at this convention to just keep going. And we did it end to end. It was the only time I've ever done it end to end. But it was super fun. The room was really into it. And yeah, that one's a very fond memory.
I miss that.
We should give credit to Lee Weinstein, who is the closest we have to an Eye of Argon scholar. He did a lot of research, and he found, as Hildy said, he found the full text, and he was the one who put together the definitive edition that was published by Wildside Press. Yeah. So you can actually buy a copy of this book now.
We should also mention, this is obviously in public domain, so if anyone's watching this, they want to read it, just do a Google search, you'll find it. It's easy enough to find.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's in public domain, but I do know that Ansible has a photostated copy of the original from OSFAN.
Right.
Wow.
So it's got the illustrations, some of which I copied over, so we have some of the illustrations. But if you actually want to see the typos that we're talking about, and remember, as Gail was talking about, it was early technology, so correcting typos was a big problem, which is why most of the typos just exist. It just wasn't worth the effort to go through and clean them up. And the other word citations are definitely gems.
You can't correct mimeograph with whiteout because it's you know it's like carbon paper.
Yeah.
So, you know, so you're kind of stuck with it. So that's another problem.
You have to do a whole new page.
Yeah, you have to start all over from the beginning. Let's talk about Aresia, because one of the things that happened was Aresia decided not to do the Eye of Argon anymore. They thought it was insulting to his memory. So I'd like to get the panel's comments about that. Do you think? Obviously we're doing it, so we don't think it's insulting, but what do you think of that kind of idea? Are we being insensitive, or are we wrong?
I started off saying exactly that Aresia is wrong. This man is remembered. He is remembered. This is the only piece of fiction, so far as we know, that he ever wrote. but he is still remembered 18 years after his death, 20 or 30 years after he left the field, and he will be remembered for having done that. What did he do? He wrote a story. Was it a great story? No. But what did he give to the community? He gave us something that enables us to laugh at ourselves and each other. We're not insulting him. We're taking his memory and we're keeping it alive.
I remember talking to Lee before there was even any controversy about it, and he said that Jim did live long enough to know people were doing this, and his reaction was along the lines of, well, you know, wasn't what I'd intended for it, but people are having a great time with it. The story's still being read. You know, Jim went on to become, I believe he was a journalist. Yes. So he actually did remain a writer and obviously did fine at it. He wasn't upset by it. So I think people vicariously choosing to be upset on his behalf, okay. I mean, if you want to, but he wasn't. And he's frankly the only person I would, if he had been upset by it, if he had come out and said, oh my God, I'm so ashamed and embarrassed people are doing this, I might feel a little unhappy about it, even though of course he's not around anymore. But the fact that he was in on the joke, okay, it's cool.
I mean, you can err on this. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Gail.
I don't think that in any of the readings that I've been part of, it never has felt malicious or like anybody was making fun or that anybody was looking down on it. It was, hey, we all probably have a manuscript that's a lot like this shoved in a drawer somewhere, and only by the grace of God, ours did not end up on the internet. I know I do. And everybody was just having a good time with it, and there was no malice intended. So I don't feel that it is disrespectful. I think it certainly seems to fall well within the limits of parody if you needed to go that way. And I think that's the way we've all approached it. Is it may not have intended to be a parody of epic fantasy, but it is. And so reading it with that sense of humor, like any other parody, no, I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. And knowing that the author was okay with it, I don't really think anybody else's opinion counts.
Keith?
I mean, on the one hand, they're erring on the side of being sensitive, which is not in and of itself a bad thing. But there's a certain limit to that. You know, that I get where they're coming from, but I don't agree with it either. I respect the decision, but I don't agree with it in the least. I think for the reasons everybody has already said, especially if Weiss himself was okay with it. I mean, you know, like Hildy said, if he was embarrassed about it or was annoyed about it, then yeah, it would be. But if he was okay with it, what the hell does the convention care?
And it's not like he did publish it. It's not like it was something we stole from his bottom drawer, you know, or took on a hard drive. You know, he did put it out in the public. So that's
a good point. I mean, when we're all writers, probably, and we all once you put your stuff out there, it's fair game. If somebody wants to take, you know, one of my novels and make fun of it and read it, that's the risk you take when you publish something, even if it's only published in a mimeograph fanzine that only 14 fans read in 1970. You're still publishing it. You're still putting it out there into the world, and that comes with a certain risk.
Right. And when it's, at least in my experience, whenever it's been read or performed, it's never from the perspective of, let's make fun of this guy. Yeah. Like, we're all so perfect that we were born writing Shakespeare. There's never been, let's mock this. This is not about mocking the author. We've never done that. You know, that would be a whole other thing. If let's all get together and pile on this poor young dead guy, that'd be horrible. But that's not what it's been about.
It's sort of like Ed Wood. You know, you watch an Ed Wood movie, and you're not really making fun of Ed Wood. You're making fun of the movie because he was enthusiastic and he meant it. You know, and you kind of want to encourage that kind of creativity, even if it's done poorly. You're sort of making fun of the product and not the person.
And
some of what we're laughing at. Go ahead.
I'm perfectly happy to read Mark Twain making fun of James Fenimore Cooper's work. I am perfectly happy to read Lord Byron making fun of Southey's poetry. You know, this is part of it's in essence part of literary criticism, for lack of a better way of putting it.
And some of what we're laughing at are the mistakes he made for having been so young when he wrote it. He was completely inexperienced, but they're the same mistakes we all make when we're starting out. It's just that he had the courage of his convictions to send it to a fanzine and get it published when he was 16. And one feature of this manuscript that I particularly love, that we tend to gloss over, is that it's broken down into chapters. The entirety, I haven't actually done a count. I think it's about 14,000 words, but it's broken down into chapters. And the chapters are chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 3.5, chapter. Every time we get there, I love it. I love the concept of here's chapter 3.5, and there are actually 2 half chapters in the manuscript.
Well, I think the other things that in this era also makes us laugh when we read it. And again, if he wrote this in the early 1970s, he was reading things that formed his opinions of epic fantasy that were written in previous eras. And it's just so tropey. It is all the pulp tropes. I think to an extent, you could pick up pretty much any tropey pulp of the period and read it and find a lot of the same things, which to our, 2020 ears, oh, we don't do that anymore. Oh my God, I can't believe he said it that way. But that's part of what made the pulp stuff what it was. And so in that sense, I think there's an element of laughing at our own in-joke of, hey, we all write this stuff, and look, this is really what we came from. And let's be honest, this is what sucked us into reading and writing this in the first place. It's the tropes. It's just too many of them piled on top of each other.
A very good point. Ian, why don't you show us some of the writing? Put it up on the screen.
Right.
Tell us about this.
Yeah, so when I joined the troupe, I was the editor. I was the guy following along as the reader would read to point out when the reader made a mistake and had to get up and act, and we called in the next reader. And I realized I was the only one enjoying my piece of the show. Everybody else was enjoying the stage set, which I never got to see, thanks. But I wanted to share what I was experiencing. So I put together an annotation. And I am going to show you a bit of the annotation, if I can figure out how to do this share screen thing, because I'm sorry, I'm still a little new. There we go.
There you go.
Okay.
Ta-da!
So just to give you an idea of what it is we're looking at. Now, mind you, I've retyped it. On the left is the original manuscript form. It's not the manuscript, it's new type of the original manuscript with the mistakes highlighted. And on the right is what is wrong with these mistakes. And this runs the entire book. And I decided, the entire story. And I decided that in some cases, I needed to annotate in addition to simply pointing out the mistakes. Thus, I've got word definitions. When he's using the word wrong incorrectly, he does that with some frequency. And occasionally, he uses some really strange words that you probably not heard, but he uses them exactly correctly. So I put some of those into the annotation as well. The other problem is you don't hear punctuation when we read. I hear punctuation because I was a big fan of Victor Borge, but most people don't hear the punctuation. So I needed to point out that as well because, well, punctuation is my thing. And I'm scrolling through very quickly right now just because
there's a picture.
These are some of the illustrations that occur that were in the original.
Looks like Dr. Strange.
And I just looked at them. Yeah.
Smoking a dude. Yeah.
This is the beginning of chapter 3.5.
Chapter 3.5. Yay!
I just love that. And
reverberating.
We've been doing it long enough that we actually have certain bits that we skip. Just because they don't move the story nearly as quickly as the other pieces. But here you go.
And they're not as much fun to act out. Some of the parts we skip. Yeah. But that's what it looks like. And The problem we have is when he started bringing this to conventions and showing it on the screen, everyone was reading it instead of watching the acting. So
I'm sorry, I was drawing attention.
Yeah, but it's almost like we could do two different things. One where we act it out and one where you get to read along with it, because both of them are fun to do. All right, does anyone, before we go reading some, for anyone who is watching this who hasn't heard it yet, we're going to read some to you with hopefully you'll understand how it gets read, but does anyone have any final comments you want to make, concluding comments or anything else about Eye of Argon or any stories we haven't mentioned yet?
I actually worked, I wrote a Buffy the Vampire Slayer novel in 2007 called The Deathless, and it involves Baba Yaga and Koschei the Deathless and Bulat the Brave, all from Russian mythology. And Baba Yaga needs to cast a spell, and one of the things she needs is the Eye of Argon.
Yes.
I had to do it. I had to put it in there. I have no idea how many people actually got it, but it was, I needed some sort of spell component, and it just hit me. It's like, I got to put the Eye of Argon in there. It's too good to pass up. And she kept it in the freezer.
Have you heard from anyone about that? Anyone contact you and say, oh, no?
Been 13 years, nobody said a word. So
someone's got it. They just, not everyone thinks to contact the authors when they find things like that. Yeah. All right, well, Gail, you want to start reading us? She's going to start with the actual beginning of the story. This is how it starts.
The weather-beaten trail wound ahead into the dust-racked climes of the barren land which dominates large portions of the Norgolian Empire. Age-worn hoofprints smothered by the shifting sands of time shone dully against the dust-splattered crust of earth. The tireless sun cast its parching rays of incandescence from overhead, halfway through its daily revolution. Small rodents scampered about, occupying themselves in the daily accomplishments of their dismal lives. Dust sprayed over 3 heaving mounts in blinding clouds, while they bore the burdensome cargoes of their struggling overseers. Prepare to embrace your creators in the Stygian haunts of hell, barbarian, gasped the first soldier. Only after you have kissed the fleeting stead of death, wretch, returned Grigner. A sweeping blade of flashing steel riveted from the massive barbarian's hide enameled shield, as his rippling right arm thrust forth, sending a steel-shod blade to the hilt into the soldier's vital organs. The disemboweled mercenary crumpled from his saddle and sank to the clouded sward, sprinkling the parched dust with crimson droplets of escaping life fluid. The enthused barbarian swiveled about, his shock of fiery red hair tossing robustly in the humid air currents as he faced the attack of the defeated soldier's fellow in arms. Damn you, barbarian, shrieked the soldier as he observed his comrade in death.
For a second there, Ian posted the words. I think we should do that while people are reading it. So people, is that okay with everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do
Also,
that.
Escaping Life Fluid is totally the name of my next band.
Oh, perfect.
But you have to tell me what page we're on.
I'm not sure. This is Arriving After Dusk. If you can do a search for that section, is the next section. But while he's searching, basically that's what we have to deal with. And if you saw all the mistakes, you would understand a little better. So now we're going to show you the mistakes. Hildy's going to read the next section, and as soon as Ian puts it up, we'll get started.
Yep.
There you go.
Okay. All right. Arriving after dusk in Gorzon, Grigner descended down a dismal alley, reining his horse before a beaten tavern. The red-haired giant strode into the dimly lit hostelry, reeking of foul odors and cheap wine. The air was heavy with choking fumes, spewing from smoldering torches, encased within the dens, earthen-packed walls. Tables were clustered with groups of drunken thieves and cutthroats, tossing dice or making love to willing prostitutes. Eyeing a slender female crouched alone at a nearby bench, Grigner advanced, wishing to wholesomely occupy his time. The flickering torches cast weird shafts of luminescence, dancing over the half-naked harlot of his choice, her stringy orchid twines of hair swaying gracefully over a lithe, opaque nose as she raised a half-drained mug to her pale red lips.
I'm going to interrupt for just a moment to say I just now realized that there's a typo in my annotation there. The definition of lithe is pliant, not plaint. Mistake.
I'll have to fix that.
I will.
Glancing upward, the alluring complexion noted the stalwart giant as he rapidly approached. A faint glimmer sparked from the pair of deep blue ovals of the amorous female as she motioned toward Grigner, enticing him to join her. The barbarian seated himself upon a stool at the wench's side, exposing his body, naked save for a loincloth, brandishing a long steel broadsword, an iron spiraled battle helmet, and a thick leather sandals to her unobstructed view. "Thou hast need to occupy your time, barbarian?" questioned the female. "Only if something worth offering is within my reach," stated Grigner, as his hands crept to embrace the tempting female, who welcomed them with open willingness. "From where do you come, barbarian? And by what are you called?" gasped the complying wench, as Grigner smothered her lips with the blazing touch of his flaming mouth.
I'm just clicking. I don't remember how long you're supposed to read.
The next page, that's the end. Go ahead.
I'm almost there.
Yep.
The engrossed Titan ignored the queries of the inquisitive female, pulling her towards him and crushing her sagging nipples to his yearning chest. Without struggle, she gave in, winding her soft arms around the harshly bronze-tied of Grigner, corded shoulder blades, as his calloused hands caressed her firm, protruding busts. "You make love well, wench," admitted Grigner, as he reached for the vessel of potent wine his charge had been quaffing.
All right, we'll stop there at that
That
point.
was it.
I love the protruding busts with the sagging nipples.
Exactly.
It's a lot of look. Yeah.
That's a fun section to act out.
Yes.
There, you know, I think there's a whole level of this that some of us who are not 14 see in his prose that perhaps a 14-year-old really didn't intend to imply.
Well, did you catch the fact that the loincloth was brandishing a broadsword?
Yes, that's why I started giggling, because I just
Very
hadn't
talented
read it for a
I
while.
wasn't really asking you, I was asking the audience.
The next section starts with "I shall never understand the ways."
Let me see if I can do a search rather
So
than
while he's searching
scrolling.
for that, though, but part of the fun is acting this out and knowing how
Got it.
a 16-year-old back in 1970 who probably only had access to Playboys, and that was his knowledge of his sex, you know, his sexual experience would come out, and reading gore novels probably, you know.
Right.
You ready?
Yeah. Keith's going to have this next section.
"I shall never understand the ways, if your twisted civilization. I simply defend my honor and am condemned to life confinement by a pig who sits on his royal ass, wooing whores, and knows nothing of the affairs of the land he imagines to rule." Lectures Grigner. "Enough of this! Away with the slut before I loose my control." Seeing the peril of his position, Grigner searched for an opening. Crushing Prudence to the sward, he plowed into the soldier at his left arm, taking hold of his sword, and bounding to the dais, supporting the prince before the startled guards could regain their composure. Agafund leaped Grigner and his sire, but found a sword blade permeating the length of his ribs before he could loose his weapon. The counselor slumped to his knees as Grigner slid his crimsoned blade from Agafund's ribcage. The fat prince stood undulating in insurmountable fear before the edge of the fiery-maned comet, his flabs of jellied blubber pulsating to and fro in ripples of flowing terror. "Where is your wisdom and power now, your majesty?" growled Grigner. The prince went rigid as Grignard discerned him glazing over his shoulder. He's lived to note that the cause of the noble's attention, raised his sword over his head, and prepared to leash a vicious downward cleft, but fell short, as the haft of a steel-rimed pike clashed against his unguarded skull. Then blackness and solitude. Silence enshrouding and ever peaceful reigned supreme. Before me, Sarah! Before me as always! Ha! 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 Nobly cackled.
That's another fun scene to run.
Oh, yeah.
Ian's going to read the part that starts with the short 70-foot falls. This is the next scene is one that's always also fun to act out.
I particularly love how many of the names are low on vowels.
Yes.
If it's a poor country, they can't afford vowels.
Exactly.
Okay. Share screen. Oh, got to get you off my screen so I can actually see the text. With short, heavy footfalls, the priest approached the female, his piercing stare never wavering from her quivering young countenance. Halting before the terrified girl, he projected his arm outward and motioned her to arise with an upward movement of his hand. The girl's whimpering increased slightly, and she sunk closer to the floor rather than arising. The flickering torches outlined her trim build with a weird ornate glow as it cast a ghostly shadow dancing in horrid waves of splendor over smoothly worn whiteness of the marble-hewn altar. The shaman's lips curled back farther, exposing a set of blackened, decaying molars, which transformed his slovenly grin into a wide, greasy arc of sadistic mirth, and alternately interposed into the female a strong sensation of stomach-curdling nausea. "Have it as you will, female," gloated the enhanced priest, as he bent over at the waist, projecting his ape-like arms forward, and clasped the female's slender arms with his hairy, round fists. With an inward surge of his biceps, he harshly jerked the trembling girl to her feet and smothered her salty, wet cheeks with the moldy touch of his decrepit, dull, red lips. The vile stench of the shaman's hot, fetid breath overcame the nauseated female with a deep, soul-searing sickness, causing her to wrench her head backwards and regurgitate a slimy, orange-white stream of swelling gore over the richly woven purple robe of the enthused acolyte. The priest's lips trembled with a malicious rage as he removed his callous paws from the girl's arms and replaced them with tightly around her undulating neck, shaking her violently to and fro. The girl gasped a tortured groan from her clamped lungs, her sea-blue eyes bulging forth from damp sockets. Cocking her right foot backwards, she leashed it desperately outwards with the strength of a demon possessed, lodging her sandaled foot squarely between the shaman's testicles.
Gotta love the aim there.
Perfect aim, exactly.
Right between the testicles. That's a tough shot. It
Right
really is.
there.
When we do this live, we need to get something so that when she regurgitates, when we act it out, we need like one of those little poppers, that sprays, confetti over somebody, maybe.
We need a glitter bomb. We definitely need a glitter bomb for that.
Or one of those paper confetti things.
It'll be fun to do when we're finally able to see everybody in person again.
Yes.
So we've enjoyed this, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you have too. Go check it out, the Eye of Argon. Before we leave, let's have everyone say goodbye, introduce themselves again in case you missed it, and where we can find you. Hildy?
Hildy Silverman. My latest story, as I mentioned, is in Badass Moms. You can find that from Crazy 8 Press and Amazon.com. And when conventions are back on, you'll see me on the con circuit, and I look forward to it.
Ian.
I'm Ian Randal Strock. I'm the only Ian Randal Strock, the only Ian Strock on the internet. So if you go searching for my name, you're going to find me. IanRandalStrock.com just gathers them all together on my page. FantasticBooks.biz is the important one from my point of view. And most of the time I hang out on Facebook.
Keith.
Keith R.A. DeCandido. You can find me at DeCandido.net. I am also the only Keith DeCandido you will find, mostly because no other self-respecting Italian would have a first name with TH in it, because there's no TH in Italian. Blame my mother. And she liked the name Keith. What can I tell you? but it worked out. Anyway, DeCandido.net is where you can find me. It's a terrible website, but it's a link dump to all the places where you can find me, including my blog, my Twitter feed, my Instagram account, my Facebook page, my writings for Tor.com, where I write a lot of nonfiction, links to my most recent books that are available, my bibliography, all sorts of stuff. So just check me out there.
Gail.
Hi, you can find me at gailzmartin.com and at morganbryce.com. The Z is very important. There's another Gail Martin who writes inspirational fiction. I write about vampires, so make sure you get the Z. It's BRICE for Morgan Bryce. That'll get you a lot about the books and where to find them. Everything's on Amazon. A lot of things are in bookstores. I come out with new stuff a lot of the time, so there's plenty of new stuff to look for, and I'm usually on Facebook.
And I'm Michael Ventrella. There is another Michael Ventrella out there who apparently won that TV show, The World's Biggest Loser, years ago. So if you search for Michael Ventrella, you'll see Michael Ventrella, World's Biggest Loser. So please look for michaelaventrella.com, and you can find it out. Someone asked me what the A stands for.
What does the A stand for?
What does the A stand for?
Adventure! So if you get a chance, go to michaelaventrella.com and you can have links to all my books and all my links and all my blogs and everything else. So thank you everyone for showing up. I appreciate this, and it's been great seeing everyone again. Maybe next year.
Yeah.
That would be great. Thank you folks for watching. This has been Continual, and we'll have plenty more coming up. Thanks to everybody for being here. See you soon.